Rolex doesn't make watches, it assigns identities. From the diver to the CEO to the guy trying to look like both, every single model is designed to say something about you before you ever open your mouth. But here's the part no one tells you. Some Rolex models elevate your status and others quietly expose you. Today we're breaking down every Rolex model, what they were built for, and what they really say about the person wearing them. This is the Rolex ladder. We start at the bottom, which is not where you think it is. The Purist, Oyster Perpetual, and Air King. If you want people to look at your wrist and your watch and say you know exactly what you are doing, this is the level you are on. There is a specific kind of confidence that does not need to be loud. It does not need a ceramic bezel. It does not need a date window. It does not need 3 rows of oyster links and a screw-down crown that signals professional depth ratings to a man standing in a hotel lobby. The Oyster Perpetual is a watch with no complications. That sentence, read by the wrong person, sounds like a criticism. Read by the right person, it sounds like a philosophy. Retailing from around $6,600 in 2026, the OP is technically Rolex's entry point. But the people who buy it on purpose, not as a starting point, but as a deliberate endpoint, are not beginners. They are the people who looked at the entire catalog, understood every option, and chose the one that says the least. Sizes run from 28mm to 41mm. Dials come in coral, turquoise, yellow, green, and a blue, so saturated it almost reads as a provocation. The bracelet is oyster. The bezel is smooth. The case is pure oyster steel. On secondary markets, these trade at or marginally below retail, no gray market premium, no allocation drama. That is the point. You can walk into most authorized dealers and buy one, today. Without a relationship, without a purchase history, without spending 18 months acquiring Datejusts to earn the right to ask about something else. The Air King sits beside it at around $8,150, slightly harder to read. Originally conceived as a tribute to the RAF pilots who wore Rolex during World War II, it disappeared for years, returned in 2016, and has since accumulated a quiet collector following that the mainstream watch press largely ignores. The dial is distinctive. It has bold Arabic numerals at 3, 6, and 9, a second scale running the chapter ring, a design that is not for everyone and is entirely fine with that. Watch communities that understand what it is describe it as the smart buy of the current lineup. That reputation is not accidental. Here is the quiet truth about the Oyster Perpetual that almost every introductory Rolex guide fails to say. The people who wear the OP as their final answer, not their first Rolex, their only Rolex, tend to understand watches more deeply than the person wearing a Submariner they waited 2 years to be offered. The Submariner wearer walks into a room and wants you to see the watch. The OP wearer walks into the same room and knows that the people worth impressing already understand what they're looking at. That is a different kind of status, quieter, more durable, harder to fake. The Oyster Perpetual proves you don't need a complication to make a statement. The next model proves you don't need a sports watch to own a room. The Everyman Hero, also known as the Datejust. If you are looking at the watch that screams that you have made it and don't need to prove it, well, the Datejust is not just the hero you need, but the hero you deserve. Let me show you why. In 1945, Rolex introduced the date, just as the world's first self-winding waterproof chronometer to display the date automatically in a window on the dial. The watch they launched that year, with the Cyclops lens, the fluted bezel, and the Jubilee bracelet, was not just a technical achievement. It was a legendary identity invention. Check the wrist of most professional class individuals who have achieved success. You'll find the Datejust. This watch became part of their unofficial uniform. 80 years later, nothing has fundamentally changed. And that is the story. The Datejust in 2026 is still the most produced Rolex in the catalog. Still available in 4 case sizes, 28mm, 31mm, 36mm, 41mm. Still offered across oyster steel, rolls or two-tone, and full gold configurations with a dial matrix so large that 2 people can own Datejusts for a decade and never once own the same watch. The fluted bezel with Jubilee bracelet combination remains the specific reference point. It is the configuration that says you know what you are doing. Within the Datejust family itself, the way the OP dial colors separate the deliberate buyer from the indifferent one. So, which one are you? Price on steel models starts at around $8,000 in 2026. Secondary markets show current production steel datejusts ranging from around $7,000 to beyond $16,000 for the 41mm with fluted bezel and Jubilee, and several configurations are trading at or above retail following the January 2026 price increase of approximately 7%. The market for vintage datejusts, references from the 60s and 70s with tropical dials, two-tone cases, original bracelets, operates on entirely different logic. The identity the datejust projects has always been specific. It is not the watch of someone who wants to be seen as athletic. It is not the watch of someone performing youth. The datejust is the watch of someone who has arrived at a version of their life that has a schedule worth keeping track of. The professor, the attorney, the architect who spent their 30s building someone else's firm and their 40s building their own. Walk through any professional district in any major city in the world, and the most common Rolex on the wrist of the person who has unambiguously made it is not a submariner. It is a datejust. The sub signals aspiration. The datejust signals arrival with no need to announce it. The mechanism powering the current production, datejust, caliber 3235, is identical to the movement inside far more expensive Rolex sport watches. The case is oyster steel, the same grade as the Submariner. The water resistance is 100 meters. By every functional measure, the datejust is not a lesser watch. It is a different watch for a different statement. The person who buys the datejust and understands that is not settling. They are choosing. The datejust is the watch you buy when you've stopped trying. The next models are for the people who never wanted to try in the first place, because their identity lives outside a balance sheet. The Tool Specialist, Explorer 1 and 2. Anytime people talk about Rolex wearers, they describe them as rude and obnoxious people who don't have anything to talk or think about apart from making money. The watch at this level proves otherwise. You'll see what we mean. There is an Explorer on the wrist of Hillary and Tenzing in 1953. Not a bespoke expedition watch, not a prototype. A production Oyster Perpetual that Rolex had been quietly supplying to mountaineers, cavers, and polar explorers for years. It is the kind of watch that worked not because it was purpose-built for extreme environments, but because Rolex built it robustly enough that extreme environments couldn't hurt it. The Explorer has spent the 70 years since that summit maintaining the same relationship with its wearer. It is not trying to impress you. It is trying to work. The Explorer one today is a 36mm watch. Rolex returned it to that original dimension after a brief 39mm phase. It has a black dial, Mercedes hands, luminous Arabic numerals at 3, 6, and 9, and caliber 3230 inside. Besides these, there's nothing notable. There is no date, no bezel complications, 100 meters water resistant, retailing around $10,000. The Explorer 2 is the 42mm version with a date, an orange 24-hour hand, and a fixed bezel for tracking dual time. It was originally designed for cave explorers who couldn't distinguish day from night underground. In 2026, it remains one of the easiest steel sport Rolexes to acquire from an authorized dealer. With the whole waiting list game Rolex plays, how is this possible? The watch community thinks this is because of two different things. 1. Limited demand. 2. A watch that doesn't need hype to justify itself. Watch the secondary market on these and you'll notice something. Prices increased only around 2% in January 2026, the smallest jump in the entire catalog. The Explorer's customers are not speculation buyers. They are not flipping. They are wearing them. The identity the Explorer projects in 2026 is specific and increasingly rare in the luxury space. It is the watch of the person whose weekends look different from their Mondays. The surgeon who trail runs. The venture capitalist who climbs. The writer who disappeared for 6 months and came back with a manuscript and some altitude sickness. It says, "The watch was a tool before it was a symbol, and the person wearing it has not forgotten which came first." What the Explorer does not do is perform. It does not have a bezel story. It does not have an origin mythology that most people recognize by name. When you wear an Explorer in a room full of watch people, they see a person who chose deliberately. When you wear it in a room full of non-watch people, you are wearing a watch that looks expensive without telegraphing which one it is. Both responses are the point. The Milgauss belongs on this level too. Or it would, if Rolex hadn't quietly discontinued it in 2023, the anti-magnetic scientist's watch with the green sapphire crystal and the distinctive red lightning bolt seconds hand. Originally built for CERN researchers in 1956, It could withstand magnetic fields up to 1,000 Gauss, the kind of environment that would reduce a standard Rolex movement to an expensive paperweight. Its absence from the 2026 lineup is the most interesting gap in the current catalog. The watch community is convinced Rolex will bring it back. The technical case is compelling. The Land Dweller's Dynapulse escapement, by design, is inherently resistant to magnetic fields without requiring the soft iron Faraday cage that made the original Milgauss necessary and, incidentally, thick. A new Milgauss built on a derivative of caliber 7-135 would be simultaneously thinner, more accurate, and more capable than the watch it replaces. If the lightning bolt hand comes back, and it should, you would have one of the most technically interesting propositions in the lineup. You'll have a watch with a legitimate engineering story, a cult following, a 70-year history, and a movement that justifies it all over again. Whether any of this materializes at Watches and Wonders this April is, at the time of writing, still unknown. Its absence matters because it leaves the tool specialist rung with a gap that the watch community feels. There was a watch in this lineup for people who wore a Rolex in a particle accelerator, in a recording studio wound with transformers, in an MRI suite, in any environment that treats precision instruments as disposable. That customer exists. They are wearing something else right now. They are waiting. The Explorer is for the person who earns their Rolex. The next two models are for the person who simply wants everyone else to know they earned it. The Hype Club, the Submariner and GMT Master 2. There is a specific era of luxury culture that the Submariner helped build and has been unable to escape. Call it the era of the flex. The Submariner was the first watch Bond wore, the first watch that established the vocabulary of sports luxury, the first watch that made a steel tool watch aspirational to people who would never dive deeper than a hotel pool, and it has spent decades carrying the weight of its own mythology. The Submariner in 2026 is, by every technical measure, an outstanding watch. The no-date reference, 1-24060 41mm, black ceramic bezel, caliber 3230, 300 meters water-resistant oyster steel, is a legitimate piece of engineering. And it just crossed a psychological barrier that the watch market has been watching approach for 18 months. It retails at around $10,050, the first five-figure Submariner in the watch's history. The date version sits at $11,200. On the secondary market, steel Submariners trade from neutral to about 8% above retail depending on condition and reference. The Starbucks, the green dial, green bezel 126610LV, commands its own premium. They are not hard to find if you have the relationship and the budget. They are just no longer cheap. The GMT Master 2 is the more complex conversation. Designed in partnership with Pan Am for pilots to track two time zones simultaneously, the GMT has become the watch of the person who wants everyone to know they travel frequently, expensively, and in a direction that requires the bezel to mean something. The color stories here have taken on their own mythology. The Pepsi, with its red and blue bezel, the Batman in black and blue, the Coke in red and black. The Pepsi in particular has become increasingly scarce, with some authorized dealers indicating it can no longer be reliably ordered as new, adding a scarcity narrative that only accelerates demand. The GMT can be around $10,700. On secondary markets, the premium configurations trade comfortably above that. Now, the observation no Rolex guide says clearly enough. The Submariner and GMT are, in 2026, the most socially legible watches in the catalog, which is both their greatest strength and their most interesting liability. Every person who has ever wanted a Rolex has wanted one of these. Every person who wants to signal membership in a particular tribe of wealth and taste reaches for one of these. They are excellent watches. They are also the watches that people who know watches look at and make immediate assumptions about the wearer's relationship to status signaling. That is not a criticism. It is a diagnosis. The person who understands this and buys the Submariner anyway has thought it through. The person who buys it because it is the default has not. The question is, which one are you? The Submariner and GMT tell the room you've arrived. The next watch tells the room you understand something they don't. The new Vanguard, Land Dweller. In April 2025, Rolex did something it had not done in over a decade. It launched a new collection. Not a new reference within an existing line, not a new dial color on an existing case. A new collection, the Land Dweller, with a new movement, a new escapement, a new bracelet architecture, a new case design, and 32 patent applications and patents attached to its construction. 18 of those patents are exclusive to this watch. 16 concern the movement alone. The engineering press release reads like something from a brand that had been holding its breath for 10 years and finally exhaled. The movement is caliber 7135. Rolex's first high beat movement, beating at 5 Hz or 36,000 beats per hour, which is how a mechanical watch achieves measurement to 1/10 of a second. The escapement is called Dynapulse. It is not a Swiss lever, the industry standard since the 17th century, but a twin escape wheel system that transmits energy to the balance wheel without sliding friction, which means no lubrication required on that component, which means accuracy that does not degrade over time in the way traditional escapements do. The power reserve is 66 hours. The case back is sapphire crystal, transparent, so you can watch the movement work. 40 millimeters or 36. Oyster steel with white gold bezel starting at around $14,450. Everose gold, platinum with ice blue dial at $63,500. All on the new flat Jubilee bracelet, a reinterpretation of the 1945 original with flat, angular links that integrate seamlessly with the angular oyster case, a design language pulled directly from Rolex's late 60s integrated bracelet experiments. The reference 1630 and the oyster quartz, references that the brand had never revisited at this scale. The honeycomb dial is the detail that divided the watch community the moment the curtain lifted. Laser-etched hexagonal cells in subtle relief, with the grooves between each cell cut by a femtosecond laser and open Arabic numerals at 6 and 9 that are reminiscent of the Explorer and Air King. Some enthusiasts found it busy. Some found it precisely the right amount of distinctiveness for a watch that is supposed to announce a new chapter. Roger Federer was photographed wearing the 40mm Rolls-Royce version at Wimbledon months after launch. That image did more for the Land Dweller than any press release. On secondary markets, the Land Dweller traded at double retail between September and November 2025. As of early 2026, it continues to command approximately a 70% premium over retail. For context, the Submariner, the most iconic Rolex in production, trades at roughly 0 to 8% above retail. The Land Dweller, in its first year, is holding a premium that the Sub hasn't seen in years. The identity signal is precise. The person who wears a Land Dweller in 2026 is not wearing the watch that everyone defaults to. They are wearing the watch that requires you to know something before you can appreciate it. They are wearing the watch that says, "I didn't want the safe choice. I wanted the right one." This is Gorpcore for people who understand horological engineering. A watch that looks substantial and modern and expensive while telling anyone who knows watches that its owner paid attention to the January keynote at Watches and Wonders and made a decision rather than just making a purchase. The Land Dweller is the watch that proves you're watching Rolex, not just wearing it. The next two are for people who stopped watching a long time ago because they're the ones being watched. The Modern Executive, Sky Dweller and Daytona. Let's talk about Daytona first, because there is a version of this conversation that doesn't exist without it. For most of the past decade, the Cosmograph Daytona was the unambiguous answer to the question, what is the ultimate Rolex? A steel chronograph with a tachymeter bezel and a white or black panda dial that Rolex produces in quantities so deliberately controlled that the secondary market has permanently priced it above retail. The steel Daytona retails at $16,900 in 2026. On secondary markets, clean examples trade well above that. Some have always traded well above that. The Daytona's mythology was built on scarcity in racing. Paul Newman wore a specific reference that sold at auction for $17.8 million in 2017. The watch has name recognition that extends far beyond the watch community. It is one of the few references where non-watch people know the specific model, not just the brand. For a certain generation of luxury consumers, saying, "I have a Daytona," carried a weight that "I have a Rolex" never did. Here is the observation that the 2026 market is beginning to make, quietly, in the forums and the dealer backrooms where honest conversations actually happen. The Daytona may be losing its throne, not because it has become a lesser watch, because the story has become a familiar one. The person who walks in asking specifically for a Daytona in 2026 is reaching for the grail that defined 2017, 2019, 2022. The person walking in asking about the Land Dweller is reaching for the watch that is writing its story right now. Status is a moving target. The Daytona has not fallen off it. but it is no longer the only name at the top. Picture the collector who spent 3 years cultivating an authorized dealer relationship specifically to earn the allocation, who finally got the call, who wore it for 6 months before a friend at dinner leaned over and said, "Nice sub." The Daytona wearer had to explain. The watch community would consider this a small tragedy. The Sky Dweller is a different animal entirely. It launched in 2012 as Rolex's most complicated modern movement. It operates a regatta annual calendar that requires resetting only once per year, combined with a dual time zone display. The Sky Dweller has spent over a decade being underestimated. It is not a sports watch, it is not a dress watch, it is a traveler's watch built for someone whose life genuinely spans multiple time zones, and it wears that function without announcing it. The complication lives in the bezel. 12 rectangular windows that display the months of the year, one advancing per month. The off-center date hand is a separate mechanism. The movement, caliber 9002, required years of development and contains one of the most elegant calendar mechanisms currently in production. This is not a watch you appreciate from across the room. It is a watch you appreciate once you've held it. The green dial steel Sky Dweller is currently the most elusive reference in the steel catalog. Wait lists for this specific configuration are, in some markets, longer than the Daytonas. The identity it projects is the identity of the executive who reads the room and selects what to say, rather than the one who leads with their credentials. The Sky Dweller says, "I travel constantly, I never confuse the time zone, and I made this selection because I did the research." Together, the Daytona and the Sky Dweller, this rung is for the person who has moved past proving wealth and into expressing it through judgment. The Daytona is the louder choice. The Sky Dweller is the sharper one. The Daytona is the dream most people describe when they close their eyes. The next rung is for the person who stopped dreaming about watches and started making other people dream about theirs. The Suvrang. Day date and 1908. The day date was introduced in 1956. It was the first watch to display both the date and the day of the week, fully spelled out, not abbreviated, in a window on the dial. It was immediately adopted by every American president from Eisenhower onward, by heads of state and prime ministers and the kind of industrialist whose name appears on buildings rather than on doors. It is made exclusively in precious metals, yellow gold, white gold, Everose gold, and platinum. There is no steel version. There has never been a steel version. Rolex does not intend to make a steel version. Entry retail in 2026 begins at around $40,250. The platinum references with stone-set dials reach well beyond $100,000. On secondary markets, day dates trade approximately 10 to 20% below retail for most configurations, not because demand is weak, but because the market for a $40,000 gold dress watch has natural limits that steel sport watches don't. The identity the day date projects is not complicated. It is the identity of someone for whom the concept of aspirational has become retrospective. They aspired, they arrived. The watch is the artifact that confirms it. When the wearer says Wednesday in full letters on the dial, they are not seeking legibility. They are expressing a relationship with time that only people who control their own schedules can have. No one with 3 back-to-back meetings they cannot reschedule needs the day of the week spelled out in gold on their wrist. That display exists for the person who sets the meetings. The watch community is anticipating what Rolex may do with the day date in 2026, its 70th year, though Rolex, characteristically, has confirmed nothing. When the Submariner turned 70 in 2023, the acknowledgement was a subtle bezel hue adjustment and no press release. Anything the day date receives will likely be similarly understated. A new dial material, a reference evolution, nothing that compromises the watch's fundamental statement. Then there is the 1908. The 1908 was launched in 2023 as Rolex's purest expression of classical watchmaking, named for the year the company was founded, powered by caliber 7140, available in white or yellow gold on leather or on the new Sedimo bracelet. The Sedimo is the detail. A gold bracelet with an architecture borrowed from haute horology rather than tool watchmaking, it transforms the 1908 from a leather-strapped dress watch into something closer to a Patek Philippe Calatrava in ambition, while retaining the dial that says Rolex. The people who know what the 1908 is, who understand that its caliber 7140 is the direct ancestor of the Land Dweller's caliber 7135. They understand that the transparent caseback was a quiet technological statement before it was an aesthetic one. And they are not buying it because it is the most impressive-looking Rolex on the shelf. They are buying it precisely because it isn't. Picture the person at the top of the Rolex ladder. They have the budget for anything in this catalog, for any watch in the world, technically. They have worn Submariners and Daytonas. They may still own them. When they reach for the 1908 on a given morning, they are making a statement that the day date doesn't require and the Submariner doesn't even attempt. They are saying, I have stopped performing wealth entirely. What you're looking at is what I actually wanted. No hype premium, no secondary market theater, just the movement, the case, and 70 years of everything this brand learned about how to build a mechanical watch. That is the top of the ladder. And the extraordinary thing about it is how few people know to want it. The Rolex catalog is, at its core, an identity matrix. Every reference is a decision. Every bezel style and dial color and bracelet configuration is a sentence in a paragraph the wearer is writing about themselves, whether they know it or not. What has changed in 2026 is the cost of the wrong decision. When a no-date Submariner retails at over $10,000 and a land dweller carries a 70% secondary market premium on a movement that is genuinely new, the stakes of buying without understanding have quietly risen. The person who buys the default Rolex and the person who buys the right Rolex are spending similar money. They are not making the same statement. The ladder is still climbing. The 1908 is still waiting at the top. And most people who walk into an authorized dealer this year will walk out with a watch that says exactly who they wanted to be without ever realizing that the watch said everything first. So what do you think of these levels? Which one are you on? Which one do you want to be on? Let me know what you think in the comments. Like this video and hit that subscribe button.